It's a pleasure to introduce our second finalist. The presenters will be Ashish Sinha from the University of New South Wales and Sharat Mathur, who's from the Symphony IRI group. There's a third co-author, Anna Sagal, on the paper as well. And the title of their entry is Category Optimizer, a Dynamic Assortment, New Product Introduction, Price Optimization, and Demand Planning System. So please join me in welcoming this group.
Good afternoon. My name is Sharat Mathur, and I'm a Senior Vice President at the Symphony IRI Group. Before I start, I just want to say thank you to the committee here at MSI and ISMS for organizing this. I must say this has been a very interesting conference so far, and as a practitioner, I've really enjoyed the interaction and really the focus of marketing science scholars on things that impact us. Those of us who are out in practice. So thank you very much for that. As I said, I'm Sharat Mathur. My co-presenter is Ashish Sinha. He's a professor at New South Wales, and he has promised to answer all the difficult questions. Let me tell you a little bit about this project. This project was completed in the 2007-2008 time frame when both Ashish and I were working together in a consulting firm, which was commissioned by Foster's Wines Estates. So this was that's the time period that we did the initial work, but we have followed it up till very recently. So let me start by telling you what this project is about, and this project is about wine. Specifically, it's about Beringer, California collection, and the focus really is on how this portfolio of wines, which is called Beringer California Collection, increase their profitability and intangible assets and improve their competitive position considerably as it happened. And it focuses on both the portfolio of existing products and new products, and it focuses on not just one but several elements of the marketing mix. So as we did the project, we actually addressed many different parts of marketing and many different types of issues, which we're going to talk about soon. So let me talk about sort of the key highlights of this project. Number one, this is a big deal. It was a $100 million plus decision for Foster's Wines Estates. They had some real issues with their brands, some real challenges, and they were trying to make some real strategic plays. So it was a fairly major decision for them. Secondly, as I mentioned just a minute or two ago, it integrated a set of strategic levers. Pricing, new product, and channel strategy. And very often, what we find, certainly in practice and in academia as well, a lot of projects focus on one specific aspect, whether it's pricing or whether it's improvement of sales or whether it's channel strategy. We actually focused on three of those and integrated a solution across all three, which we'll talk about. The third aspect of this is that we were actually able to, unlike a lot of other projects that I have done, we were actually able to get some real tangible financial improvement results. And we'll show you some actual quotes and actual results from investor meetings and such, which were a direct result of our doing the project. So that was a big deal for us. And from a methodology perspective, which Ashish will talk about, it's a fairly unique approach that uses store data to calibrate both the transferable demand and incrementality or the non-transferable demand. So from a methodology point of view, this was a fairly unique approach as well. To give you a background of the company, Foster's Wine Estates, as it existed at that time, and is one of the large wine companies. It covers 3 continents, 54 brands, and over 11,000 hectares of vineyards. It is now called Treasury Wine Estates. So those of you who follow the Foster's company They demerged in 2011. The wine business was demerged from the main company, and as you know, SAB Miller is trying to acquire Foster's currently. So there's a lot going on in the current environment. In terms of the major brands of Foster's Wine Estates, they included some of the brands that I know and love from my time in Australia, like Penfolds and Lindemans, as well as they include a brand from New Zealand, which is the Matua Valley and Chateau St. Jean. So our story begins when Foster's purchased Beringer for about $2.6 billion back in 2000. And the reason was very simple. It was a strategic play to enter the US market. Beringer provided a very strong foothold in the American market. There was clear expectation that the US market in wine was going to grow. And Beringer was one of the market leaders, one of the best-known brands within the US market. And so it made a lot of sense. And Foster's very quickly became one of the largest premium wine companies in the world and really offered a fairly wide portfolio of products from really premium wines to mass-marketed wines. And the Beringer California collection that we'll be talking about was in the latter category. Beringer, as I said, was the largest brand. It was distributed primarily through grocery channel. So it was mainly at that time focused on the grocery channel. Subsequently, they moved into the drug and mass markets, but at that time, grocery was the primary focus. The target market was the novice and uninitiated wine drinker. So people who have traditionally been drinking other spirits or beer or are just starting out, students, whatever, the novice drinker. The budget range was very low, so it was $4 to $6 bottles of wine. So many of my colleagues here would not drink that. But it was definitely wine targeted towards sort of an easy trial of the category. And when we started doing the work, it was focused primarily on the pink varietals, so what I call the blush wines, the Zinfandels, the White Merlots, the Chenin Blancs. So in the 4 years since they acquired Beringer, the profits really started to decrease. And they found that just between 2003 and 2004, the profits went down from $230 million to $182 million. That was largely due to both the Australian dollar becoming stronger during that period of time, as well as some real cost pressures. So they were facing costs, not just the utility costs, but the grape sourcing costs, et cetera. Commodity prices were volatile, so on. And then on top of everything else, there was an oversupply of wine in the marketplace. So what it did was it created a tremendous amount of competitive pressure on them. Given the fact that the market, the wine market was sort of at an early stage in the late 1990s, 60% of wine brands were introduced after 1999, which is huge. And within that time, if you remember, there was global competition from Chilean wines, Argentinian wines, Australian wines. Of course, Foster's also distributed the Australian wines. And the third implication was that within the grocery channel, because of the proliferation of products and the high number of SKUs, there was a tremendous amount of trade promotions, and people generally moved volume by providing high levels of trade promotions. And then the final thing about the marketplace was that there was this new entrant called Yellowtail, which was like a tsunami. It was a real disruptor to the marketplace. Yellowtail was an Australian wine, or is an Australian wine. They also started in 2000. They targeted primarily beer drinkers. That was their main focus. They also focused on the grocery channel. They were priced at $6.99, even though on trade, on specials, you could get them for $5.59 or even, $5.99 or even $5.59. And they became very quickly one of the most influential wine labels globally. And they had a very high recall. They were extremely well known. And within the United States, they had a market share of 3.15%, which may not seem much, but if you think about the proliferation of brands within this category, that is one of the dominant market share. So in terms of the Soothe and Tellus work, they became what I think Jerry refers to as a firm disruptor in the paper. And they focused on the same kind of market. So given this backdrop, Beringer had a real conundrum. They had competitive pressure, they had industry disruption, and they had cost pressures. So they basically came to us at that point. And we were approached by the managing director of the US business, who I had worked with at one of the earlier clients when he was at an earlier client. And he came to us with 3 questions. First is, given that the margins are falling, should the Beringer California collection increase their price, and if so, by how much? Second, should they introduce new products? Given that there were so many brands within this marketplace, but also given the fact that Beringer had a good brand recognition, should they even try to introduce new products, and if so, what types of products at what price, et cetera? And then the final question was, of course, how they should respond to Yellowtail. So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Ashish. He's going to talk about the modeling system and the methodology. So Ashish.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Sharat. First thing, if you see me tripping or slurring, it's not because I've had one too many glasses of wine to drink. It's because my mind is still Sydney time, which, John, it should be 6:30 in the morning, something like that. So that's the reason why. OK, now, the modeling system here, one thing to realize is that this system existed long before Foster's came on scene and has existed since. So when we were designing this particular system, we wanted something that was applicable right across different contexts, different geographies. And when I say geographies, I mean continents, and also different categories. So things like fast-moving consumer goods to durables. So while the system should have insights, or should provide us insights with things like assortment, mix optimization, price optimization, Shat's been through that, new product introduction. The big thing, the big specter, was very early on in the design process, we pretty much realized that we would have data constraint. When I say data constraint, what I mean is that outside of the United States, it's really hard to get good panel data, survey data. As a matter of fact, you might never have stockout data whatsoever. So we were constrained by store data. That was something that we always had to take into consideration when designing any sort of an assortment, for instance, any solution like that. OK, the basic concept, category optimizer is no different from any other category management tool, that there are you can decompose the volume of any product into 2 components. One of them is the transferable demand function, which is nothing other than market share, and the non-transferable, which is about the market size. Now, if you do introduce a product, does it actually grow your category or not? So we use a 3-step modeling system. You've got the transferable demand function, the second one is non-transferable, and then finally you optimize. Now, I'll focus on the transferable demand function, which uses a combination of internal market structure and aggregate mixed loadeds. And it's an attribute-based approach. Neo-Lancastrian, I have to thank Jordan for that, for teaching me this, a Neo-Lancastrian approach, where products are defined by features, but consumers don't buy features, they actually buy benefits. The reason why they buy products is because of the features that it possesses and the benefits that it provides them. Objective characteristics are called features, and subjective characteristics are called benefits. In our case, we call them attributes, and that's why it's called an attribute-based methodology. Now, a little bit of Greek, I was told by Gary I need to have 1 or 2 slides. This is marketing science. What would I expect? So here we go. Mixed logit, it's a mixed logit model. And we are making an assumption that the deterministic component is a function of, well, the intercept term. And we're also controlling for the marketing mixed variables. We make an assumption that the intercept term is a function of what the preferences are for the different features that a product possesses. Simple thing. Make an assumption that these preferences are normally distributed and that the variance-covariance matrix has a principal components decomposition to it, which provides us with a perceptual map of competition. Now, if you put all the technical mumbo-jumbo to one side, what it is actually doing is quite simple. It is providing competition in perceptual space. That means if you've got 2 products that are close to each other, they compete more. The further away, they compete less. So in this case, and this is, I've moved you from wines to mode of transportation because it's the red bus, the old red bus, blue bus problem that we were always told about in my first class in marketing modeling. So, and not only that, the other part is that if you were to introduce a new product, in this case it's the blue bus, that where would this new product source its volume from? So these are the two things that this particular part or the transferable demand function does. Now, the second part is by far the most challenging of all because we have to calibrate the incrementality of each one of these products using a category volume model. So the first thing that we do is to calculate the uniqueness scores for each and every product. And that uniqueness score is using something called Gower distance, which is how unique one product is in comparison to the assortment that is there in a particular store. So in this case, and it ranges from 0 to 1, where 0 means that it is not unique to the assortment at all, while you go to 1, it goes the other way, that it is completely unique. So in this case, this would be the most unique product, henceforth closer to 1. The values would be closer to 1. And the buses, because it's like facings, the value would be closer to 0. The second one is, now this uniqueness score exists in perceptual space. It's not in volumetric space. So we have to convert these uniqueness scores into volumetric space. And the premise of the approach, or our approach, is that there are a number of natural experiments happening in the marketplace at the same time. And that is that all SKUs are not bought in all stores all the time. When they are bought, it has an impact on category volume. When it is not bought, it does not have any impact on category volume. So you've got lots of zeros, instances where there was no sale of that product. The other one is, even if they are bought, then the uniqueness score, which is dependent on the assortment, that means will be different across stores. So this gives us enough variability in the data that we can develop a sort of a category volume that provides us, given the availability, the SKU volume, and the uniqueness, it goes from perceptual space, the uniqueness space, into the volumetric space. Now, and that is by row, so as a coefficient that you can estimate. We use a log-log or a semi-log. The only problem is I don't know how to handle zeros in log-log models, so that's why the preference is often semi-log rather than a log model. And the third part, so again, going back to this, you've got the transferable demand function, the non-transferable demand function, and then all you have to do is optimize, so it's nonlinear optimization for pricing. Knapsack problem would be normally for assortment. And usually there'll be simulations. If it's a new product introduction or a price point, then usually it'll be simulations. Now, what I've provided you with is a general overview. What we did for BCC, for Beringers, is that there were 3,000 SKUs in that, defined by 4 features, 25 brands, 4 varietals, 3 sizes, 7 countries, and then we also controlled for a number of marketing mix variables. Piped it through a system. The transferable demand function provides us with 4 maps. Each one of them have 2 dimensions. Calculate the cross and own price elasticities. Then is the uniqueness of each SKU using those 4 maps, and calculate the incrementality. And finally, run simulations at different price points, as Sharat mentioned, 5%, 10%, 15%, and also for different innovations that this particular company was interested in. And this is a really broad overview of the results that we got. There was much more to it, but this is just a very brief summarization of it. That pink varietals compete less with Chardonnay, but to a greater degree with Pinots, Cabernet, and Merlots. Order of preference was that Chardonnay is the most preferred, and Merlot is least. And brand equity of Beringer was very similar to that of Yellowtail. Price elasticity came as a surprise to everyone. As a matter of fact, we were grilled and quizzed numerous times on this, even at the stage of implementation by McKinsey, is if that coefficient is right. Believe it or not, it is. So it's minus 0.85. Now, I hand it over to Sharat to go through the implementation and the outcomes.
Okay, so in terms of the, what I'll talk about are some of the results we got from this. And I'll talk about what the impact was on the organization as well, which was very interesting. So let me start with the recommendations. We basically recommended that using their portfolio and mix to improve their position. The first element of our recommendation was increasing the price by 20%. Our simulation shows that that would result in about a 17% decline in market share, roughly speaking. But if they introduced Chardonnay at the same time within the Beringer California collection, that would actually mitigate the decline in market share. The second recommendation related to the grocery channel. And we recommended to them that over the period of the next year or so, they ought to introduce within the grocery channel a set of new varietals other than the blush varietals that they already had. And then the third set of recommendations was related to order of entry of these varietals. So our analysis recommended that they start with Chardonnays. That was the first one. Then Cabernet and Merlot together, and Pinot Noir as the third one. Now, Pinot Noir was an interesting question. Actually, it was second in rank, but it is an expensive wine to produce. And so a business decision was made to introduce Pinot Noir third instead of second. So in terms of implementation timeline, the price increase was in January of 2008. So roughly about 4 or 5 months after we did the initial analysis. This was followed by the Chardonnay introduction also in January of 2008. The Cabernet and Merlot were introduced in June. And then by the end of the year, Foster, seeing some of the successes within the US marketplace, decided to take this to some of their other markets. And so they had a price increase in some of the other markets in late 2008. And finally, Pinot Noir was introduced in 2009. Interestingly, Foster's followed our recommendations very, very closely in terms of how they implemented it. And to their credit, they implemented the strategy in a very disciplined manner. And part of it was because it was driven by the CEO or the CEO of the American business at that time and his leadership team. So let's talk about financial impact. Immediate impact was actually a little alarming. So market share went down by 14%. And because of the price increase, the revenue was more or less flat. So revenue was one of the primary criteria, but they were a bit, I must say, alarmed by the market share. But if we look at what happened in the medium to long term, first of all, the Chardonnay, Cabernet, and Merlot were very popular introductions within the marketplace. So they were the 3 most popular introductions within the wine category in 2008. The market, they had regained, by the end of 2008, they had actually regained some of the market share, and it was only down by 10% instead of 14% when they started. The revenue base actually went up by 3%, which in the context of a company, a billion-dollar company, is quite a bit. And then the EBIT for North America was up by 8.5%, and their overall profitability went up quite considerably by 70%. So tremendous results at the end of the first year. By the end of 2009, the market share was back to the pre-price increase level. So they were able to claw back their market position to what they were at the pre-price increase level. The most interesting thing was the ROI on the project. And this is kind of a clear indication that we charged them too little. They had a tremendous ROI if you take what they kind of made as a result of the strategy. So let me talk a little bit about what happened with our friends Yellowtail. Over time, we've been tracking Yellowtail shares, and it was pretty steady through 2008. But in 2009 and 2010, it's been coming down. In contrast, the Beringer California collection, which went down in 2007 quite a bit, and somewhat in 2008, has actually now been coming up in their share. And these may be, once again, very small share numbers, but for a category that has tens of thousands of different SKUs, this is not a bad performance. The other interesting thing was from we had talked about the Tellis and Sooth paper. The disruptor, as the paper predicted or suggests, lost its dominant position in 2009. And the reason really was that the incumbents, which was Beringer California collection, was able to respond to the disruptors' inroads with some success. Let me talk about the impact of this study. And what you're seeing here is, it's not a video testimonial, but it's a real indication of what the CFO, Angus McKay, said in August of 2009. And this is at the investor conference or investors meeting that was held in Australia. And what he said was, and I will read this quickly because the font is kind of small, the expanded California collection provides retailers with a strong Beringer branded varietal set in the fast-growing $4 to $6 price point. This is a significantly enhanced position compared to the primarily pink wine offerings we had a little over 12 months ago. Over the next 6 months, as we start to lap the price increase, we expect an improvement in the comparative performance of Beringer White Zinfandel. We also expect the broader California collection to continue to benefit from the expanded varietal offering and increased distribution. So very clear testimonial to our study. On top of that, in the investors meeting, the CEO, the global CEO of Foster's, as well as the US managing director, were grilled intensely about their somewhat counterintuitive strategy of increasing price and introducing new brands in a market that was somewhat saturated. And they used our methodology and our simulator as an example of the reasons why they thought it was a good strategy. So our methodology provided the foundation on which the leadership team of the company built their strategy. Let me tell you about some of the intangible impacts, and this is really a big deal. So this is one of the big indices that is called the Power 100. This is in the wine and spirits industry. And they use hard and soft measures to rank different brands for the last, it's been around for the last 6 years. 2006, 2007, no Beringer. So there was no Beringer within this index in the top 10. In 2008, Beringer debuted at number 6, which was a very big deal for the company. And those of us who are in industry know that companies live and die by some of these external ratings. So this was a very, very big deal for Foster's. And finally, let me talk about the generalizability of the solution. This approach or this methodology has been now implemented across some leading organizations. And you can see some of the logos here: P&G, Home Depot, GlaxoSmithKline, J&J, et cetera. And it's now been applied to companies both in the US and in Australia. We have worked with some of the consulting firms over the last 4 or 5 years within this industry successfully to apply it at these clients. And this has impacted over 9 billion of sales. So our methodology has been used by some of these very large companies in that. So we are at 0, and I'm done with my presentation. Questions?
I'm a wine drinker, so this is particularly useful. I think I do fall in that consumer segment, which you are talking about. So most of the wines I buy are not at the eyesight level. You have to bend down to pick them up. But I have, I did not fully get, what you estimated and how it got implemented. So maybe this is a clarifying question. But as I understood, you said to the company, increase the price by X%, which will result in a loss of share. And to make up for the share loss, you introduce Chardonnay and Cab and maybe one more, right?
Yes.
But what did you gain from the assortment optimization there? Because that seems like, here is one thing, I'm increasing price, I'm going to lose share, and to make up for the share, let's introduce some new products.
Sure. Can I answer them?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. Okay. This is a very general purpose sort of an algorithm. And specific to a particular problem, we do simulations. In this case, no optimization was required. There could be another situation, for instance, with Home Depot, where it was required. So it just depends on what the client wants. It's like a hammer, but you don't have to smash every rock the same way. It is all dependent on what the clients want. In this case, no optimization was required because they knew, as a matter of fact, they could have taken much higher price increases because it's inelastic. But point is, strategically, they couldn't have taken it anything more than 20%. The retailer would not have accepted it. As a matter of fact, even 20% is very hard for it. So there was no optimization, but it was because simulations were required. That's, even in my presentation, there is a nonlinear optimization for pricing, but in this case, it was not required. It was all about simulations.
But simulations to gather what?
To see what, so you increase price by 5%, what's the market,
okay.
And then if you were to increase Chardonnay, then what would be the impact of that? So it was a combination of a couple of things. Which product should you be introducing? Should you be introducing Pinot Noir? Well, can't, because it's too expensive. And that, so those are the sort of things that we learned from the simulations, and that allowed us to then figure out what should the order of entry be. Now, this was a problem. This is what the client wanted. They didn't want us to optimize, so it's not like we can optimize just because there is a possibility of this methodology to optimize. So the client and the problem have to match up.
Oh, okay. So then maybe I'll take this chance to ask you about the more general situation. Sure. Okay. Sure. As much as I like wine. So, so suppose you think of Home Depot or a grocery store, right? So this is my black pepper question. Right, so grocery store doesn't make a whole lot of money by selling black peppers, right? Mm-hmm. But they have to have it because consumers will want it, right? Consumers expect to find it there, right? So, how would the methodology which focuses on transferable and non-transferable demands, within a category capture the triple level effect?
Sure. I mean, so if you're looking at store optimization rather than just one product optimization, then it would be where does the transferable demand function can be defined in any way. It is all dependent on how you define the structure. For instance, we could take snacks. You have salty snacks, and then you have sweet snacks. Then go down within that. So the tree could be anything. Your transferable demand function is the way that you define these things to be, and what the non-transferable would be accordingly. So it doesn't really, to me, is the same hammer. It's how you define that macro strategy and the attributes. As long as you've got common attributes across, then you can, and we've done it, for Procter & Gamble, for salty snacks, that's exactly what we did. So you can define like popcorn to things like, Doritos. All these things will have certain attributes that are common. That is the most important thing, because at the end of the day, it's all about benefits. It does not really matter If it's about, what are you accruing from the consumption of that product?
Well, my question is more about criticality of some products to the store, but anyway, I'll let
okay.
PK ask questions.
All right, thank you for a very nice presentation. Enjoyed it. I have a question because you are actually competing in a very competitive market, and you are building a decision support for category optimizer in a category where you probably have 3,000 SKUs. Now, my question is, how did you take into account competitive reactions? One of the things that was missing when I was listening to you was, it looks like you have gained share, but then you're talking about 1 or 2% gain, and there are other players in the market. Now, could that be because the other players made a mess of something? They also increased prices? Some information on that will be very useful to understand how exactly did your optimization or your category optimizer really contribute toward the overall impact that we are seeing.
Yeah. Couple of points here. One is that it is rare to get market share increases by somebody else kind of screwing up in the marketplace. You've typically got to do something proactive in order to gain market share. So let me start with that. In this particular case, there were some very, first of all, this was a leading brand. Okay, so in many ways, it was a marketing influencer. And between Beringer and Yellowtail, those were the few brands that actually had a brand name in those days, or within the category. The other brands were all fragmented little wineries and things like that. So there was clearly an impact of the strategy on the market share. The other thing which I would say is that there was a lot of external validation for the strategy. And in particular, if you think about the Power of 100 page that I showed you, that is really looking at how the brand has evolved, what has changed with the actual brand, as opposed to just a gain in market share. So if it were just a gain in market share, Beringer probably wouldn't have made it to that category. But because of the innovations, because of the breadth of the portfolio, because of some of the aggressive pricing strategies that they employed, that was probably the reason why they made it to win the number 6.
Okay. I have one small question with respect to the method that Ashish talked about. How did you actually estimate the non-transferable demand functions for new products being introduced in the market?
Sure. It's actually one of the major advantages of the system is because it is all dependent on uniqueness scores. And you're going from perceptual space to volumetric space. So for any new product, as long as it has the same attributes, not attribute levels, but attributes, then you can figure out where in perceptual space it lies, and you know what the assortment, the current assortment is. If you were to add, how would that uniqueness number, what would that uniqueness number be? And once you have that, it's very easy then to calculate the incrementality. Am I making sense?
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.